having explored the idea of salt and what it's all about and some of its symbolism, we're going to talk now about that saying, rubbing salt into the wound. At Connect, we actually looked up where the saying comes from. Does anybody know? Well, we discovered it was, we think, from an 18th century practice that when someone is flogged, then someone would take salt and rub it into the wounds of being whipped. And the purpose of it was to make it even more painful than it already was. It's not a nice idea, is it?
Well, we improved a little bit, didn't
We do seem to have improved a little bit, yes. And so, look, we use the term, don't we, to when we're talking about making a bad situation worse. It could be circumstances, you know, that someone has something bad happen to them, and then something else bad happens to them that rubs salt into the wound. Or it could be intentional, as it was from, you know, the original saying, where the original saying came from. Yet what I find really interesting is that whilst the saying is very negative, the idea of salt being healing provides an interesting counterpoint to that idea. Something that is apparently harmful or intended for harm can heal. But then the reverse might also be true. Something that is intended to heal might actually lead to harm. So we've talked about the way that salt flavours food. We've talked about the way that salt purifies. We've talked about the way that salt can heal. And salt represents the truth. It represents an affection for truth, because when you have some salty popcorn, what does it make you want? Apart from more popcorn.
Yeah, I was going to say.
A beer.
Sorry?
A beer.
A beer or a drink of water or whatever. Yes. It makes you desire something, you see. That's what salt does for us. And so that's all tied up with its representation, the affection for the truth, desiring something to satisfy a need within us. So then imagine using the truth to torment someone. Imagine that, using the truth to torment. And what it makes me think of is it makes me imagine it as a picture of hell. A picture of evil is using the truth to torment. You see, what the church has done in the past, in the way that it's tried to fix people, hasn't worked. And it's not going to work. The church has tended to impose external teachings and more rules on people and say, well, this is the way to salvation. You have to do this or do that. You have to believe this. But that's not what actually brings healing at all. We cannot force healing upon anybody. It is an inner process. And this is where the affection for truth is important. Salt, as we eat it, stimulates the thirst, it stimulates the hunger, it stimulates a desire for something. What we need to do if we're going to bring healing to anybody in any shape or form is to stimulate the desire. It's not about telling them the facts. It's about stirring within them something that yearns for something more. That's the process of healing. That's as it begins. I was reflecting again this morning on the incident we had last week with the young man who came to the service just before we started. And he talked about salvation being by grace through faith. As I process that idea, I think that the churches have got it wrong in the way that they implement that. Because what they try and do is they try and push their faith upon people, as though merely pushing a faith on someone is going to make them better, and it is not. So Salvation is by grace through faith. Yes, it is true, but it's true because it's an internal process. And it's a process the Lord leads us through. We don't impose it on anybody. Do you see the difference? That is the grace of the Lord at work in our lives. It is the way the Lord leads every single one of us through the process that we live through. It's been quite interesting in the last week, having shared that letter on the weekly update, the number of people that have got in touch with me about that letter. I've had someone who's written a one-page response. I've had someone who's written an email and said, well, I was there. I was that young man going about telling people how wrong they were, but I've learnt how wrong I was. So many people have reacted to what took place there, and you can see the process of healing taking place through their lives, through this experience. So what it does as we go through this process is the salt, the truth, the affection for truth, shows us our own dysfunction. It shows us how we get things wrong and how we can do things better. So it's about becoming sensitive to the causes of harm, whether that's the harm that I do or whether it's the harm that somebody else does. Where we see that someone else is doing what is harmful, we stand against it. But not because we wish to impose any punishment upon that person, but we wish the harm to cease. And the reality that we all face is that we all do things that are incorrect, improper, dysfunctional. We all cause pain. And the discovery of that is a painful process. You think about yourself 10, 15, 20 years ago and how you were back then. The realization that you were wrong, that you hurt someone, is a painful process, isn't it? But should the realization not happen just because it is painful? No, we need to grow. We need to experience that pain, to recognize what's gone on in the past, to then be able to move on to a new and a better future. But that is an inner process. And no one here has control over my inner process, and I do not have control over yours. That is the Lord working in your life. And that's a very important distinction to bear in mind. So regeneration, as we call it, spiritual growth, is not a pain-free process. It's just not. But the pain is a sign that healing is beginning. As we go forward, and here's your challenge for the week ahead, I want you to reframe and redefine your perception of pain. Realize that sometimes pain is actually good for you. It's actually the beginning of the road to healing. Often it is. It's true of a physical wound as well, isn't it? The fact that you feel a physical wound means that you look after that area of your body in a way that you wouldn't be stirred to look after it if you didn't feel it. And that is the beginning of the healing journey. The same is true within us. The pain is the beginning of healing. So notice the pain, and sometimes be prepared to sit with it and think, what can I learn here? Is there something more than just the uncomfortable perception that I have? Is there something to be gained? And let's also be careful how we speak to others. Let's also be careful of how we frame the truth. You know, how we share a perception that we might have that they don't have, that we believe they need to hear. And let's understand that it is the Lord in charge of that process, not us.